Thank you. Thank you. If we can get the room's attention, please. Thank you. Okay, so welcome again. Just wanted to remind everyone, we do still have the roses for sale, as well as the raffle tickets for the wine basket. Thank you so much for coming out and being here today. We really appreciate all of you and your support that you give to us. Our esteemed panelist here, our esteemed panel, I should say, we welcome very much for them to be here today. Rowena Santos, who is our Peel Regional Councillor for Wards 1 and 5, is moderating today. We have Kane, Deputy Fire Chief from Brampton Fire and Emergency Services. We have Adjei Scott, Community Manager from the White Ribbon Campaign, and Onzhane Walker, Manager of the Journey Neighbourhood Centre. So thank you. So I'm just going to pass the microphone on to Councillor Santos here to start the conversations. And since the volume seems to be on the lower side, just please, if we can have your attention, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Can everyone hear me better at the back if I speak as if I'm trying to hit the wall with my voice? Can you hear me in the back? Okay, so first and foremost, happy International Women's Day. And thank you to Melissa for that amazing introduction. And I have to say that I love the month of March because quite often the rooms that we walk into are rooms that don't look like this. And they're usually rooms that are predominantly have men at the table. With all due respect to my brothers who are here today, I'm hoping that perhaps you feel a little bit more uncomfortable. And then you have a sense of what it's like for us every single day for the most part. That being said, it was a little bit of a chaotic morning this morning, as many women here I'm sure would appreciate. My son, I'm a single mom, my son was sick, and I had to drop my dog off. And unfortunately, I can't just easily hop into the shower, put a suit on, and brush my hair to the side and get to work for a panel and a committee of council meeting at 9:30. We, as women, have a routine that we have to follow in order to somewhat fit into the image that society expects us to fit. And so my morning was slightly chaotic, as I was sharing with Melissa when I walked in, but nonetheless, today is about embracing equity and celebrating all of you and thanking all of you for your daily routines and sometimes being taken for granted in terms of how much you invest in the community, how much you invest in your work, and how much you invest in your family, all multitasking and still working sometimes 2 to 3 times as hard as your male colleagues only to get half the credit. And so today is about embracing that and acknowledging all of you and sharing some more of those experiences with our panelists here today. So again, I'm Regional Councillor Rowena Santos, a champion and advocate for women's equity and gender parity across the city, across the region, and across the country. And I'm joined here by some amazing people. We're having an awesome conversation, which we're going to extend into this room today. So we have today Onzhane from The Journey, who does tremendous work on human trafficking and supporting women in our community with The Journey. We have Adjei, who works with the White Ribbon Campaign, an incredible organization and ally with respect to ending gender-based violence in our communities, and the indomitable Kane from Brampton Fire, who is one of Brampton's deputy fire chiefs, who is tremendous and a huge inspiration for me at the City of Brampton. And before we begin with some questions, I want to acknowledge the City of Brampton staff who are here today. We do have members from the Brampton Fire team, women and brothers. Give us a wave and say hello. We have senior leaders and management from the City of Brampton as well, and we do have Commissioner and Fire Chief Bill Boyce, who's here with us as well as Kelly and Monique, and I see Michelle, and is that Rasmeen? Rasmeen, and Ed, and I see Ed back there as well, and I can't see because Bill is covering the shadow. Yes, okay, awesome. So we have so many people here, amazing organizations. We're going to get the panel started, and if you could hear me okay, you can continue eating, and don't worry about the clicking on the plates, okay? We're going to get started. And so on this panel, and we're talking about embracing equity, and we're going to start first with Kim, Deputy Fire Chief Kim. What are some of the biggest barriers when it comes to the next generation for women? And you're a Deputy Fire Chief. You have probably overcome many barriers. We were talking about at the table that, you know, Brampton Fire or fire services in general is still predominantly white men. And as a woman, and as an Indigenous woman, breaking that ceiling and getting to the position you are now, what are some of the barriers for the next generation of women?
Good morning, everyone. Now can you hear me? Better, okay. Thank you, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning. Fire services. Yes, I am a Deputy Fire Chief with Brampton Fire and Emergency Services. I am in my 29th year of fire services, believe it or not. Thank you. So I'm on the back nine, right? I'm like, so started out in 1994. I started out in communications. I was a comm operator, and actually Sue, who is sitting at the table right there. Big shout out to Sue, who is one of our operators in communications. She is now retired. Good for you, Sue. So I started out in '94. I wasn't a firefighter. Never have been a firefighter. And I worked my way from communications to a captain. And I was told I could never be a captain. I was told that by the union president that even though you wore the stripes, we'll never consider you to be a captain. From there, I then became a division chief. And I tried to become a deputy fire chief in the municipality that I came from. And I was told that, number one, I was too young, and number two, that they would eat me alive, right? And that the reason why I didn't get the job is because they were trying to protect me. So I don't want you to protect me. I don't need you to protect me. I need you to support me. I need you to be my advocate. So I left there, and I came to Brampton Fire and Emergency Services as a division chief, and then was promoted to deputy fire chief in 2015. So that's basically my story. To give you like an example, I have a 22-year-old daughter, right? So I don't care. I'm 53 years old. I don't mind saying my age, right? My daughter is 22. So she very much wants to be either a police officer or work for CBSA. She just went to do her pair testing. Pair testing is the physical fitness test. And in the room, there are all these very broad, tall, strong, young men. And there were 3 females compared to 20 males in the room. The instructors who were there and also the testers took the females aside from the men and basically said to my daughter, who is 5'3", 5'4", 125 pounds, "Why are you here? You will fail." So at the end of the day, right, she kept it in, kept the emotions in, and she passed. And so we are now in 2023, and this is still happening today. So my advice to her was, love, you do your best, you are who you are, be authentic, and the best revenge is you will be his boss.
And so that's why she inspires me every single day. and thank you for sharing that, and we'll probably get into the discussion and unpack some of that a little bit more. But you know, every International Women's Day, sometimes I hear this passive-aggressive whispering, which is, why do we have to celebrate International Women's Day on this day? Why is it so important? Why is it so significant? How come there's not an International Man's Day? We should do that. And I want to put that out there because we do have an incredible ally here today who, and my question will be to you, Adjei from White Ribbon Campaign, why? Why is it important for us to acknowledge women on a particular day, on a particular month, or in fact every single day as an ally?
Thank you, Renee. It's really good to be here. I have a very tiny voice, so I'll try my best to expand. Yeah, it's really important for me to be here. Can I still? Okay. It's really important for me to be here as an ally in creating these conversations, right? And to your question, I think it's really important because when I think about the world in which we live in, like we've been talking about, like you mentioned, right? There's a lot of men. Oh, I'll try. I'll bring it a little bit closer. Men oftentimes occupy a position of power, right? So when you have experiences and stories like you just shared, if there was a ally in the room or in the space who was to step to that instructor and say, hey, I don't think that's right? I don't think that's correct, especially in 2023, where women have proven, right, have shown that they have equal capacity, equal strength to men, that's acceptable, right? So for me, I think about how men in those spaces can create those conversations, can call other men into conversation around kind of unlearning some of those biases that we often have, and how we can continue the conversation in a way that is meaningful, in a way that is supportive, in a way that is respectful, and in a way that we're checking our biases, right? So being reflective, being open to change, right? And being open to create opportunities and spaces and like you said, support but not protect, right?
Thank you so much, Adjei. And for those who don't know, the White Ribbon Campaign was formed in 1991 by an allyship and a group of men from London, Ontario. And it became a world phenomenon because it was in response to the December 6th murders at Polytechnique in Montreal. And so that was started by men. And Adjei is very much involved in that organization, and it's allies like this who are so important to the movement and embracing equity. Last night I was at an anti-racism and equity and inclusion meeting for the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. And I'm going to read something because it has something to do with what you shared and also segue into the work you do at the Journey. To be part of the feminist movement, one first has to accept and recognize that the reality of women's lives is subordinate to men economically, socially, and politically. Secondly, no matter where the effort is placed, the goal needs to be changing women's inequality, not merely for one group of women, but for all women in all of their diversity. And so that gets us to, you know, as a woman at the leadership table, I'm a woman of color, but I still have privilege. I have privilege because I have a master's degree. I have had housing my entire life. I never had to worry about a place to sleep, and I always had food on the table. And while I speak at council as a woman of color, I still have privilege. So while some people see me at first walking into a room and say, oh, well, she doesn't really belong here, the moment I open my mouth and start talking, they forget and they realize I do belong here. But for other women, especially many who are served by the journey, they don't have the same privilege as I do. They didn't necessarily have housing. And so their experience is very different. And that's where intersectionality of the women's movement and embracing equity is so important. And so I want to thank Onzhane for your work at the journey and for lifting women who probably don't have the same privilege as we do, who are sitting here in this room talking about it. And it's important to recognize it and the work that you do. So please share with us what it is like to serve the women and the clients at the journey, and what some of the challenges they face that perhaps we are completely unaware of in this room.
Hi everyone, can everyone hear me? Yeah? Right here? Okay, better? Thank you everyone for having me. I usually rant, so I'm going to try my very best not to go on a rant today. But first I want to say that we're starting with me. How I got involved with the Journey Neighborhood Center, I was a placement student for my social services diploma from Sheridan at first. And then I never left the Journey ever since. Well, I should say Kevin, who is our executive director, never let me leave the Journey ever since. So it's funny how it kind of ended up being a full circle for me now to become the manager of the Journey. Forgive me, I talk with my hands a lot. I've been working on it. So I think with that, the Journey primarily serves the Arglen and Orenda communities. And for those who don't know about that community, I call it the forgotten community of Brampton. The substance use is very high there, human trafficking is very high there, domestic violence is very high there. It's one of our schools, called Sir Winston Churchill, is one of the lowest schools in the EQAO. So these communities face a lot of challenges. And a part of the challenges with the women is just that I find they're so focused on their families. They're so focused on their children, and they're not really focused on themselves. They're focused on getting their children out the community, getting them their education, and make sure that they're okay, and not really paying attention to how they've contributed to it. And these communities are so tragedy-stricken that it's very hard sometimes for them to see a way out. A part of the reason why the Journey was started was to really be the bridge between the system and these communities, because we couldn't reach the communities. The city couldn't reach the communities, programmers couldn't reach these communities, and now we're in our 10th year of being open, but it took a long time for us to build this trust with these communities to let them know that we are an organization that wants to listen to them. And I think one of the problems that continue now is just that everything is still worked from a top-bottom approach instead of a bottom-top. So we have a lot of organizations, a lot of grants for such, and a lot of like officials that come in and say, you know, this is the problem, instead of actually speaking to the community members and finding out what the problem is. So I think that Journey is important because they bridge that gap with being the community trusts us to come to us to tell us about the situations, and they trust us to advocate on their behalf to all these officials and say, no, that is not the problem. This is what it is. This is what we need support in. And if you're going to come to us and ask us for our trust and to build a relationship with us, then this is what we need you to follow, because this is what the community is saying. So I think that's what makes the Journey so different from a lot of organizations, because we are committed to listening and walking hand in hand with these community members. So for us specifically, what we try to do is we try to celebrate them in any little ways that we can. Thanks to Zonta, during Christmas time, we give self-care bags. And as I was saying to my other panelists, we specifically have these self-care bags for them. So for example, I purposely buy things that I know they cannot use for their children. Reason being is because I'm a mom too. And everything I get, I try to split with my kids. So I said, if I'm thinking this way, then I can imagine what they're thinking this way, because this is a community that's impoverished. They have food insecurity, they have a lot of issues, they're basically on survival mode each and every day. And me being a person that comes from privilege, yes, I face a lot of challenges being a young woman, being a single mother, and being a black woman that has locks. if you want to be specific, that talks with their hand, and that can be loud a bit, you know? So it's kind of like, for me, coming into that community, it's also a privilege for me because I'm educated. But no one really looks at your journey. Everyone just looks at the results. So they see that I'm educated, they see that I can talk well or I articulate myself well, but they don't see how long it took me to get into York. They don't see all the challenges I faced trying to get my bachelor's so I can succeed because everything else around me was telling me not to. I love social work with all of my heart. That's where I'm meant to be. But it was very difficult going through so many years of schooling to constantly be reminded of a society and of a place and of a world that told me where I wasn't supposed to be. It was hard to constantly hear about how the system has oppressed people of color, and specifically like my community, the African and Caribbean community. It was very hard to deal with that every single day, to read about it, to write about it, to talk about it. So I know when I step into a room, it's like, oh, she's young. Oh, I don't know if she knows her stuff, like you were saying. And then it becomes, now I'm black, and I have locks, and I'm always put on this, I'm always looked as if I don't know what I'm doing, or I don't know what I'm talking about. And to walk into a community and say, I understand, can be very difficult, because it's how do you understand? But it's when you share your journey, when you share your challenges, when they see it firsthand for themselves, it goes, okay, we can trust you. Okay, you know what we're talking about. And I think that's the difference between having an organization, just to have an organization, and having an organization that's for the people, that's for the community, because it's a matter of listening to them and saying, yes, you see me of privilege, but I'm a representation of what you can be if we work together. So I think it's important with that, and I think that's what I strive through with being the manager there. It's kind of like, yes, you see me dressed well, yes, you see my makeup done, yes, you see my hair neat, but if you look at these pictures 6-7 years ago, I was exactly like this. Yes, you see me eat well, but there was times where I didn't eat. Yes, you see me dress well, you see my car, but there's times I had to take the bus. So I'm not coming from a place of privilege, per se. Am I privileged because I got an education? Yes. Am I privileged because I'm a black woman that is open and that will talk what she has to talk? Yes. But I'm also a black woman that has faced a lot of adversity and a lot of challenges. So I get it. And I get it on a different level that no one else gets it, because that's what I had to walk through. So I think when it comes to community members, and especially women who live in communities that are tragedy stricken, that deal with domestic violence every day and substance use and such, it's not a matter of who's better than who, but who can walk in hand with who. And that's where I say that's one of the challenges. I think one of the main challenges is just acceptance. I think women are getting to the point where we all equal to men. I think that men are being forced to accept that we're not going anywhere. And I think we've worked that hard to get to that level, but it's a matter of just that acceptance. Like, as you said, your daughter, it's 2023 and your daughter's still facing this. So as much as like, it's kind of like, oh, we know you're here, but we don't have to accept that you're here. So I think the challenge is now for women to, not for women to, but for other people to accept that women are here. We are equal now. And it's not a matter of hiding behind a check mark and hiding behind your policies and your procedures. It's a matter of actually doing the work and actually looking at us like we're equal and treating us that way. Sorry, I ranted. I'm giving it back.
Rant on, sister. I'm down. And a couple of things just to share. You said women are not going anywhere, correct? Because if we did, nothing would get done. And you all know it. And in terms of this conversation of privilege and power, and understanding that as women, as men, as people, we all have some level, some more than others, privilege and power. And that's not something to feel guilty about. It's okay to have privilege and power. It's totally okay. But I think what we're saying here on this panel in our experience, and today with Zonta and embracing equity, you have to be aware of where you sit in that privilege and power, and it's also about what you do with it. Like, have privilege and power, go for it, but what do you do with it? And how aware are you of the different levels of privilege and power that you have relative to other people? So that's important. Now I'm going to go into advocacy, and I'm going to start with you, Adjei, on advocacy and the importance of speaking out. I learned yesterday at my session, I'm going to read another paragraph, about the collusion of silence and why it's important to speak out and not be silenced. Collusion is one of the ways we support and maintain our privilege and power. Make no mistake about it, our unwillingness to speak out against the systemic and casual expressions of discrimination we encounter every day, that is collusion. Our silence contributes to the continuation of the discrimination, and when we fail to object to injustice, stereotypes, racist language, sexist jokes, and elitist behavior, we help it to flourish. So when we are silenced or silent, we collude in the status quo and in the injustice. And through Adjei, would you like to share about White Ribbon and why you as an ally, it's important to speak out?
Yeah, let me know if you can't hear me as well. When I think about my kind of like how my upbringing and my life experiences, I think about, I think for a lot of young men, there is this idea of wanting to always be a part of a group, right? Whether it might be a sports team, I don't know, the chess club, whatever that group might be, right? And with this wanting to be included and seen, there's oftentimes this idea of silence that comes like that you're mentioning, right? This idea of when I hear sexist jokes, when I hear homophobia, when I hear misogyny, like I might not want to engage simply because if I do engage, I'm going to be excluded from that group, right? And I think particularly for young men and men, there is this idea of if I remain silent, then I will be protected, or I will still be included within this space, right? And I think if you're in a space where you have to always be silent, then you know that in a lot of ways that space isn't for you, or that space needs to be changed, right? So when I think about advocacy, I think about the idea of how do we create spaces of inclusion, spaces of conversation, right? So I remember when I was in high school, I contributed to a lot of the harms that was going around and circulating within my friend group, right? And I think about how, as I became more aware of how these conversations, ideas, behaviors, words cause harm, how that forced me to change, right? And forced me to acknowledge that I too was a part of causing those harms, right? So I think about in those spaces, particularly around like holding tongue or being silenced, I think about stepping out of those that I don't want to say it's a comfort zone, but stepping into a place where we should be uncomfortable, right? We should be uncomfortable in calling out sexism, in calling out misogyny, in calling out homophobia and transphobia, right? So I think about being an advocate is not always feeling comfortable, but being empowered in how we call out and have these conversations, right? So for me, what I think about is those small ways of saying I don't agree, like I mentioned before. So it's if I hear it, it's like I don't think I agree with that, right? It doesn't have to be this outwardly like, oh, you're being homophobic, you're being transphobic. It could be what do you call that? A simple gesture that shows that you're not with the things that they're saying, right? And even if it's saying again, like I don't necessarily believe in what you're saying, you're not going ahead or contributing to the problem, especially if you don't necessarily always feel safe in those spaces, right? So I think about advocating as always speaking up and finding the I don't want to say simple, but like the ways the what's the word? The actions that are gonna create that are gonna push against some of the ideas that are being put forward.
Thank you so much, Adjei. And we have only about 10 minutes left. I've got to wrap up by 8:50. And so I just want to be, as we wrap up, to say thank you to Zonta for hosting this incredible breakfast, Melissa and team for actually putting this together, to Spot One Grill for hosting it, and to all of you for being here this morning. I'm going to end with one final question, and that's pretty much to do with what do we do next, and what is your advice for the next generation? And so while the panelists think about that, I'm going to read something else that I learned yesterday from the session I attended. And it's about working together, differences in all. We'll also need the patience, perseverance, and grace to hang in with each other despite our disagreements, mistakes, and flaws. After all, coalition is not about perfection, it's about cooperation. And with real commitment to each other, we can make it, differences and all. And I really want to say that while we celebrate International Women's Day and embracing equity with all of the tremendous women in this room, our allies and the men who've been sitting here for the past 45 minutes feeling very uncomfortable with this conversation, we also want to acknowledge you, because even though you're here and not necessarily saying anything, you're listening. And we are hoping, the women in this room, that it's sitting in a little bit and that you're going to take it back, because your allyship and your privilege and your power that you have is so important to us, so that you could use it in the right way. That now being said, I'm going to go to Kim Kane to share advice for the next generation.
As I said, like I was explaining about my daughter and the challenges that she's facing. So basically, thank you all for the men who are here in this room, and thank you so much for sitting beside me and sharing your stories, and you're an inspiration in the work that you're doing. I appreciate it so much. Women have a voice. We need to be encouraged to use it. The advocates, are the men in this room, and men everywhere. And not only that, the women in this room, right? I advocate for you, you advocate for me, right? It's not, I'm competing with you, you're competing with the next woman beside you, right? So we have to support each other. That's very, very important. And it's not just about, being the best or, the most recognition. It's not about that. It is about your growth, your being authentic, your happiness, right? Challenges that we're facing, I work in an industry that is predominantly white males. We have changes. It is not like when I started in 1994. It is much different, but some of the same challenges that I faced in 1994 are still continuing today. Thank you to Chief Boyce for your leadership. I see some of my male colleagues at the table. You're helping change this, right? The microaggressions that I face and women in the industry face every single day. You're the voice, right? When you see it, you call it out. You don't wait, right? So those are just the small changes that we can do. Education. I would love to have you come and speak, right? I'd love to have you come to FIRE and yourself. So those are some of the challenges, and just being supportive of one another.
Yeah, can you repeat the question one more time? Sorry.
So the question is what advice would you give to next generation and next steps in this movement beyond today? So today, International Women's Day is great. It's wonderful, and we're celebrating each other, but we have to keep the momentum going throughout the year. And so what is your advice?
Yeah, I kind of echo what Kim was saying, is that this idea on education, right? I think that we were talking about it earlier at the table. There's a lot of misogyny going around on the internet, right? So social media, even on live TV or national TV, there's a lot of misogyny and that's going around. So I think for a lot of young men, and how particularly young men can support women and girls, is to be a bit more educated and have these conversations, right? Have these difficult conversations. See folks who are in practice and modeling some of those healthy behaviors. I think those are some of the next steps, because sometimes, as we've been seeing, is that a lot of the information that young boys and men are getting is oftentimes what lead them to cause harm, right? So if there's an awareness, a conversation starter, role models who are telling them or who are showing them that there's another way to go about being a man or performing their masculinity, I think it creates space for them to change. And for us at White Urban is that's how we create conversation about preventing harm, right? Through building awareness, through engaging young men and boys in these conversations, and through creating spaces where young men can have some of these difficult conversations and feel heard, as well as be called into a conversation about how those beliefs and ideas that they're kind of, what's the word? I don't want to say that they're kind of like replicating is causing harm. So I think that more so awareness and education, particularly for young men and boys, that's how we can create those spaces where we prevent those harms from happening. Or that's one of the ways, I should say.
I'm definitely not used to having a mic in my hand. I am not the spotlight person. To my fellow women and young women to come, I would tell them 2 words: love yourself. I think it starts from there. I personally think if I started loving myself a long time ago, I'd probably be further, but I'm okay where I'm at now. I would say to love yourself, and loving yourself includes giving yourself grace. It includes understanding that the world does not understand you. It includes accepting that not everyone will accept you. And I think it's a matter of how you perceive yourself, how you interpret yourself, how you represent yourself, and how you speak life into yourself. Because the reality is we live in a society that tells us and reminds us that women are supposed to be here. And as much as we're rising, we're really up there, not everyone is going to accept the fact that we're there. And majority of the careers that we want to get into that inspire us are male dominated. So it's just to have the understanding that as much as the world and society is changing, we're always going to have those folks that are still stuck in their ways, that are still going to say, yeah, you know, we have to accept you because that's what our government says, but as you're here, this is where I'm going to limit you. So I think it's a matter of loving yourself, and to advocates and to men and young men to come, I would say, be okay with being uncomfortable. I know it's awkward because we want to fit in. I know that it's awkward because we don't want to say the wrong things, or maybe we want to say something and we don't know how to say it. So I'd say just be comfortable with being awkward, with feeling uncomfortable, and feeling awkward, because that means that you are sensing something is off. And you may not know how to address it, but that comes with educating yourself on how to deal with it. And it's not a matter of, you know, having a discussion or going back and forth with a person. It's just a simple shake of your head or walking away from the conversation. I would also say for the people who have power and privilege to use it for good. We can have a lot of power and privilege, but we can use that power to give the opportunity to another person to speak. So, for example, if I take the mic, because I have the power to take the mic because I'm a panelist, that doesn't mean I'm the only person who has something to say. So I can easily take the mic and pass it on to my fellow panelists, right? So it's a matter of you have power and privilege, but how are you going to use it to better? So I'm going to keep it short, but yeah.
Thank you. And so, on a final note, advice for me, as I say every International Women's Day, take your place, own the space, and do it with style, humor, smarts, and grace every single day, and be unstoppable. Continue being unstoppable beyond just today. And so on that note, I want to say thank you to my fellow panelists for being unstoppable every single day and for your amazing words of wisdom and advice. And I'm hoping that this sunk in with everyone and you'll carry it forward today and in the days to come. Thank you, Zonta, for having us this morning.